we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Jeff Sear has an incredible journey of failing and recovering health. He ended up getting a diagnosis of severe lumbar spinal stenosis in the 1970s and had a hard time walking because of his permanent nerve damage. Most of the day, Jeff would sit in his lazy boy, and at 330 pounds, Jeff would need to use his cane. Jeff was given a nutritionist who told him to eat a high carbohydrate diet of whole grains and fruits. In 2008, Jeff finally stopped feeling sorry for himself and he knew something had to change. So Jeff changed his lifestyle and started exercising at a local gym. Each day, Jeff would increase the time on the bike. Over the course of the next 16 months, Jeff lost 163 pounds and eventually used a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet to further improve his health. Now he's an expert in leveraging low carbohydrate diets to reverse the same chronic diseases that he had to suffer through. Jeff Sear, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Balanced Body Radio.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here with you, Casey.
We're so honored that you would be here and reading all of that and knowing that we just scratched the surface on your story. We're really lucky to have you around. You probably shouldn't be here with everything that you've had to go through.
Yeah, can I just correct a couple of things from?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Because, I'm going to try and go through this quickly. Just stop me if. In 1997, I had severe lumbar spinal stenosis. 97.
97.
I was 37. I had to have an emergency laminectomy infusion because my spinal column was so collapsed that I was about ready to sever all the nerves from the waist down. Anyway, long story short, they had to do an emergency surgery. I was 37 years old. After that, I was out of work for a long time, close to a year. And then I ended up losing the machine shop that I had. I was a welder, metal fabricator. Anyway, I was out of work for a long time. Ended up losing that machine shop, losing our house. We didn't have any health insurance. So anyway, I was in 98, May of 98. I went down to Bath Iron Works in Southern Maine, and I started working as a welder. Bath Iron Works makes ships for the U.S. Navy. Started working there. In May of 2001, I had an injury on the ship where I snapped my whole head back on a big pipe turning a corner, ruptured 3 discs in the neck area, C4, C5, C6. So they had to do a laminectomy infusion of my neck, square plate, titanium plate and rods, screws. Went back to work. Then I needed to, in the fall of 03, another injury at work, lifting something really heavy. I needed a surgery for the mid-back, T11, T12, laminectomy infusion, titanium rods and plates and screws. Then they put me permanently disabled in January of 2004. I was 44. All fused up, titanium rods and plates from my neck down, almost down to my tailbone.
Wow.
Okay. I had always worked at hard physical jobs my whole life since a very young age. I always worked all the time. So when I became permanently disabled, I became very depressed from that because I couldn't work anymore. I was always obese my whole life. I had lost weight and regained it back on many occasions. My parents sent myself and my sisters to Weight Watchers. I was like 11 years old.
Wow.
In the early 70s. Yeah, I was 11, 12 years old. So anyway, I had lost and regained weight by that time, let's say 6 or 7 times between 50 and maybe 125 pounds, put it all back on. And it was always with a very heavy carbohydrate diet, complex carbohydrates. The typical advice that people are given.
Yeah.
So anyway, after my last surgery, disabled, became very discouraged. I couldn't work anymore. And I was more or less locked in a lazy boy chair. And what I mean by that is I can't lay down on my side or on my back to sleep or anything. So I had to sleep in a chair. But today I weigh 178 pounds. Well, back then at my heaviest, I was 345.
Wow.
Let's say 330. All fused up. To get out of my chair, I had to use a cane and support on my cane to lift myself up. So I ended up having a hernia from that. So I had to go for hernia surgery. This is April of 2005. So I go for the blood work pre-surgery. And I was supposed to go for the hernia surgery in a certain amount of days. I got a call at home the next day, Jeff, you can't go for your surgery. You have to go see your primary care doctor or a doctor. You have type 2 diabetes, very high fasting. My fasting sugar was 300, A1C of 12.
Wow.
I had no idea. So anyway, I went to a doctor, which then the doctor told me, you're type 2 diabetic. Type 2 is a progressive disease. In a few years, we'll have to put you on insulin. Blah, blah, blah. I knew nothing about diabetes. I knew nothing about how you're supposed to eat. So anyway, they sent me to a ADA nutritionist at our local hospital. And they're pushing the same stuff then that they push today. It's basically a whole food plant-based diet. So I don't know if you want to ask me anything from that so far.
No, that's great. And so in my neighborhood, there's a box where people can leave books. And so every few days I'll pass it and see different books that people leave. And there's a lot of children's books and whatever. And I believe at some point in your story, you came across a book that I literally had in my hand about 15, 20 minutes ago up in this book box, which was, I believe it's called Reversing Diabetes. And it's interesting to kind of flip through and see some of the things they're recommending. And like a typical lunch was like 2 muffins and like lentil soup. And like, oh my goodness, it seemed very high carbohydrate to me. When did you come across that book, and how much did you follow that advice?
Okay. After my diabetes diagnosis, anyway, also at that time, I'm going to mention I was on heavy doses of oral morphine for the severe pain from my surgeries. Became addicted to it really in high doses. I was smoking 3-4 packs of cigarettes a day. I had always smoked, but now I was smoking more. I weighed 330. I needed to use a cane or a walker just to get from my chair to get a glass of water in the living room. I had to use a cane or a walker. So anyway, one day I went to the grocery store with my wife, and I found the book. By the way, back then I used to have to write in those cards that you see people for handicap.
Yeah.
I had to use those in the grocery store. Now I can use a shopping cart to hold on to. Anyway, I saw a book called Reversing Diabetes. It was written by Dr. Neil Barnard. He's a doctor that pushes, it's a whole food plant-based diet. Very high in carbohydrate, like, I don't know, very high, like 60, 70%, maybe higher, 0 fat, no red meat, no eggs, fish, chicken. So anyway, I read that book and it seemed to make sense to me, count your calories. You don't need any fat.
Yep.
Zero added fat. You don't touch red meat. And a lot of complex carbohydrates, pasta, oatmeal, sweet potatoes, all kinds of complex carbohydrates. So it just made sense to me that it was going to work. So that's the first book I ever read on diabetes. What it is, which I didn't realize at the time. Because about any of this stuff back then. Let's go to after I read that book, and then one day I went with my wife again to the grocery store. Got out of my car. I was parked in the handicap. Got out of my car with my cane, and there's this man across the way that gets out of his car, and I see him pull out an oxygen. He's hooked up to oxygen, pulls out an oxygen tank that is pulling alongside him. And I saw that, and that, I don't know, it's like it would have hit me with a sledgehammer. I thought to myself, here I am, smoking 3-4 packs of cigarettes a day. I can't breathe. I weigh 330 pounds. I'm so obese that doesn't make any sense. I'm type 2 diabetic. Myself, if I continue on this path with all these drugs for pain, oral morphine, all this smoking, super obese, what am I going to do one day if I need to be like this guy? How I'm going to be pulling an oxygen tank and a cane trying to get inside the grocery store. Yeah. That just stuck with me, you know. That's when I started thinking, you know, things have to change here, you know. Slowly, wow. And it takes time.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. So, and you decided to address not only the smoking, but also the morphine, right?
Well, yeah, I had to take care of three things here. I wanted to get off of the oral morphine. I wanted to stop smoking, and I wanted to lose weight and do something where I'd be able to move to try and do something. Because, like I said, I was locked in a lazy boy chair. Pretty much, you might as well say like 24 hours a day, because I have to sleep in a lazy boy chair. I still do today, but anyway, back then, I've written posts on Facebook where you hear me say, I was frozen, locked in a chair, that's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So I knew I had 3 real hard things. I knew it was too many at once. So I figured I'm going to take one at a time. One at a time. So October 1st, 2008, I quit smoking cold turkey.
Wow.
Okay, I gave that a couple of months. Then in January of 2009, I quit oral morphine cold turkey. I was taking high doses of that.
Wow.
And I never told my pain management doctor that I was going to do this. And that's just like a heroin addict that quits heroin overnight. This oral morphine, it's the same thing as that.
Wow.
So I had withdrawals pretty bad there.
Yeah, which was harder, the smoking or the morphine?
More severe withdrawals at first from the morphine.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
Smoking was hard too. I'm not going to say it was easy.
Yeah. Wow.
But I knew that those 3 things were just too much to try. There's no way. I knew that there's no way I can do everything at once. So I'm going to try it one at a time.
Yeah, that's great.
So I quit the oral morphine. That was a very early part of, let me think, all mixed up in my time here.
Was it 2009? I believe you said it was January 2009 when you stopped the morphine. Got it.
Yeah. And then I gave that a couple more months. Then I started reading about, exercising, which I always did hard physical jobs, but I was never into sports or anything like that. I never, I never did any of that stuff. And I should, let me add something that I never talked about before, and I'm adding this because I heard you on a podcast with Tucker Goodrich, and you guys were talking about barefoot walking, and Tucker mentioned a guy with hammer toes, and I thought to myself, well, hold on a minute here. So anyway, long story short, I came to find out that I have a genetic form of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. It's a neuromuscular disease. I only found this out later on in life, but I was born with cavus foot and hammer toes.
Oh, wow.
But back then, I was born in 1960. Back then, people didn't go to doctors, and, you had a teenage kid, unless they'd break an arm, or you never went to doctors or anything like that. Anyway, I always knew I had a hard time walking. I walked funny. I couldn't run like other kids could. I never knew why. Come to find out, when I was in my early 20s, I saw a doctor, and he told me right away, how long have your feet been this way? I said,
Wow.
Since I've been born. Why? Well, he says, you have a severe case of cavus foot, where it's an exaggerated high arch, and your feet are clenched. And then you have hammer toes, the severe hammer toes. This is my early 20s. And he seemed thrown aback by the severity of it at that young age. Because what happens is you get hairline fractures in the bones of your feet, if it's an advanced case. And that's where I was in my early 20s. And he says, the only way to fix this, he says, we'd have to take 1 foot at a time, break all the bones in your toes and your feet, put it the way it should be, put a cast. You're in a cast for 12 weeks. Then we do the other foot.
Wow.
Well, anyway, I had no health insurance, and I was the type of a guy that was working 7 days a week. I was married then. We had children, bills to pay. And anyway, although I had a hard time walking, I could never find shoes that fit correctly. I just learned to live with the pain, and the hell with that, I'm not getting that surgery.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Right. So I just kept on. Later on in life, through a neurosurgeon, I found this out because my mother's brother was born with cerebral palsy. And I have nieces that also have a form of these neuromuscular diseases. And that's when we tied it all together, and it's genetic. That's when I found out that, like, the neurosurgeon didn't do, he was 99% sure that I had CMT, Charcot-Marie-Tooth, which when you have that, you're born with cavus foot and hammer toes. But now mine it's really advanced. Like, I've always had a hard time walking, but it just keeps getting worse. Your muscles weaken in your tendons, and you end up, it just keeps getting worse as the years go by. And you end up having muscle atrophy from that.
Wow.
So anyway, I never really spoken about this, but I'm only bringing it up because I heard you and Tucker talking about that. And I thought, hold on a minute. I think it was Tucker, where he saw someone that the guy said he had hammer toes, and they, hold on a second, because
Sounds familiar.
there's more to this than meets the
Yeah.
eye.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
I've never brought that up but anyway.
Yeah. So is that why when you started exercising, was that why you chose the bike? Was it just more comfortable for your feet than it would be for example, like walking?
Well, it's because I have a hard time freestanding. And what I mean by freestanding is if I get up right now without a cane to hold on to or kitchen countertop to hold on to, I can stay like that, like today, and talk to you for maybe a minute or two, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. But then I'll need something to hold on to.
I
I
see.
call that freestanding. And that's just from what I just told you about CMT, combined with having 2 major back and 1 major neck surgery, all the fusions in titanium rods, put all that together. So even today, I weigh 178 pounds. I don't weigh 330 or 345. I can get up out of my chair right now without a cane. Not as quick as you, but I can do it. And I can stand, but I won't be able to freestand for very long.
Yeah, I see. Gotcha.
So I went to the gym. Okay, you want to talk about that now? Okay. Quit smoking. Quit oral morphine. Okay. Now we're in April of 2009. Okay. I knew I had a hard time walking. I knew could find something at our local gym. It was a Planet Fitness back then. I knew if I'd go in there, I could find something. I was sure that I could get my heart rate up. So I went in there and sure enough, recumbent stationary bike. So I joined the gym and I started keeping a diary. First day I did like maybe 2 minutes, but I write that down. And I write down the mileage and the intensity and kept track of that. And I kept adding a little bit more every day. Kept a food diary. I was following a whole food plant-based diet. Let's say 0 fat, very high carb. So kept track of all this food diary, write down everything I ate, calories, what I did at the gym. And then about, I'd say 15 months, I lost about 163, 165 pounds.
Wow.
But during that 15 months, I kept on learning about, I learned about METs, I learned about heart rate training, I learned about HIIT. So I started off slow on the bike, but I wanted to educate myself on basal metabolic rates and METs, and I started learning about all that. Then I started learning about by the way, I had a resting heart rate of about 100 beats per minute.
Wow. High.
Before I started all this stuff I'm talking about. Anyway, I during those 15 months, I slowly increased the amount on the bike. I got to a point where I was doing about 90 minutes a day, 32 miles per session. And now I was wearing a polar heart rate monitor and I was going at a lot higher intensity. Then I learned about HIIT. Like 2-3 days a week, I do HIIT, not Tabitha hits, but a Sprint 8, it's called, Phil Campbell's Sprint 8. And so all this, of course, especially HIIT, helped me to lose more weight also.
Wow.
During the time frame.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, long story short, for the heart rate, I was able to finally get my resting heart rate down to like 54 or 55.
Wow, that's a
from
huge
100.
change.
That was with the HIIT primarily. But anyway, I hear you all the time, not all the time, but I've heard you mention heart rate training.
Yeah.
I learned about all that stuff back
Amazing.
then.
Yeah,
And
amazing.
I keep on. Anyway,
That's great.
15 months, I lost all that weight.
That's amazing.
So now, of course, I feel a lot better. No more smoking, no more oral morphine. and I'm down to how you see me today, talking to you. So anyway, I had type 2 diabetes. Then I go to my doctor after all this. This is like in 2010, let's say. Yeah, let's say, yeah, 2010. And she tells me, you no longer, she checks my A1C, 6.1%.
Much
Says,
better.
Mr. Sear, you no longer have type 2 diabetes, which I know now that, anyway, I was on metformin and a drug called Avandia. She takes me off the Avandia. I stay on the metformin. But the lowest I could get my A1C was 6.1%. Okay. Which is not great. Because if you look at these charts, if you use the correct formula for 6.1, it's an average blood sugar of 140.
Yeah, that's high. Not ideal. Better than it was. Better than 300.
Anyway, but in my mind, I thought I was cured. As far as she was, I no longer had type 2 diabetes. So I was ecstatic. Huh? Anyway, then go to 2011. 2011. That same doctor does annual blood work, and she finds my certain liver enzymes really high. And she was worried about that, rightfully so. She sends me to a gastroenterologist, and she does more blood work and really high liver enzymes. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to have to test further. So then they do an ultrasound of the liver, CAT scan of the liver, and then finally a biopsy of the liver. All this takes a couple of months. The liver biopsy confirmed everything. When she gets the results of the liver biopsy, she calls me at home. Mr. Sear, we got the results. You have to come see me first thing tomorrow morning. This was in the later afternoon. Okay. What's going on?
Stressful.
She says, well, you have a liver disease, autoimmune liver disease. It's called primary sclerosing cholangitis. You need to come see me tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning. So I go, and she tells me, we've done all this testing, and the liver biopsy confirms it. You have primary sclerosing cholangitis. It's an autoimmune liver disease. You're in the very early stages, very early. She says, usually people will have this for 8 to 10 years, and then you end up with total cirrhosis of the liver. What happens with this disease, the bile ducts of your liver get inflamed, large and inflamed, and they narrow up, where it gets to the point where bile can't pass through anymore. It's all plugged up. Then you end up getting total liver failure, cirrhosis of the liver.
Wow.
She says most people can take 8 to 10 years. She says you're in the very early stages, so probably longer. Okay. What can be done? I asked her. She says, well, the only thing we can do is keep monitoring you every 6 months. And when it ends up getting worse, we can try and put you on certain medications, and it ends up getting worse and worse. Then they try and pass stents through your bile ducts to try and unplug it, which is eventually 8, 10 years, maybe 15 years in your case, you will end up with total liver failure.
Wow.
Okay, that's it. So then she sent me for a second opinion to get it confirmed, and it was all confirmed. And I asked her, nothing I can do with diet, or, diet has nothing to do with that. That's the story. It's an autoimmune liver disease. And there's nothing more I can tell you.
Wow.
So they pretty much sent you home. Now at this point, when she told me that, I had already overcome a lot. So I thought, maybe I had a chance of living longer, So when she told me that, it threw me back. And I thought, I can't just, stop now. So sorry about that. So that's when I started researching. I just put in, I wasn't great on computers. My wife just bought me a computer. Anyway, I looked up autoimmune diseases, and one thing led to another, and started looking at ketogenic diets. And well, I was born in 1960, and my father had a heart attack at a young age, and you know how to saturated fat.
Yep.
And cholesterol and eggs. My father was to the far end of that, because his father he had major heart problems, and we were brought up to live in fear of saturated fat. So I started doing all this research, and it went against everything I was ever taught. Started looking up ketogenic diets and very low carb diets on all these different things, and for type 2 diabetes. And so I just kept on researching and reading papers on PubMed and reading books on diabetes and Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution. Then I read Volek and Finney's Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, Low Carb Performance, and just kept reading books and researching. And I was doing this all the time. I was like, and I thought, the more I was reading, I was still terrified of eggs and cholesterol and saturated fat and red meat. But the more research I was doing, anyway, I researched it for almost a full year. That's how terrified I was.
Wow.
And then I thought, I'm going to try this. So November 2012, I started a very low carb ketogenic diet. I had to go for blood work every 6 months for my liver panel. And it took a little bit, but after about 18 months, saw a big change in the liver enzymes that my liver doctor kept track of. And I kept on doing this, and my A1C was getting a lot better too. Fasting triglycerides, HDL. My HDL cholesterol used to be 29. I had fasting triglycerides of 250. Anyway, every 6 months I had to go for blood work at the liver doctor. Took a little bit, like I said, after about 18 months, enzymes started coming down. It took a couple of years though, like, Christ, 2012, 13, 14, 15. I don't know. It might have taken 3 years, maybe, to bring those liver enzymes, all of them, back to totally normal.
Wow.
Totally normal.
Wow.
Now, my lipid panel and my liver enzymes are totally normal. type 2 diabetes in full remission. My last A1C last December was 4.5, my lowest ever.
That's
No
amazing.
drug, just exercise and diet. I'm 62 now, no medication. You know, liver enzymes are totally normal. And here's the kicker, which I don't know if anyone has an explanation for me. I can't explain it. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune liver disease from the gold standard liver biopsy, all kinds of testing, confirmed by another liver doctor. And I needed to apply for new life insurance a couple of years ago, or in 2022. Like, let's go back to, like, time goes by so fast. Like 2017, I'll say. I needed to apply for new life insurance, but I knew I was afraid to ever do it before because of that diagnosis, autoimmune liver disease. That's, they see that, forget it. So I went for more testing in 2017, and that same liver doctor, they did all the blood work and everything. And he wrote a report for me. This patient no longer has any signs of primary sclerosing cholangitis. And he told them the whole story and everything. And I was able to get a new life insurance policy.
That's amazing. Wow. What an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's absolutely incredible, and very emotional. We really appreciate you being authentic with that. It kind of sets up something interesting. Like, we look back at your story and we say that you were able to make so many improvements on a plant-based diet, one that they recommended, a very high carbohydrate type diet. You did make progress. You did lose weight. You did improve your blood sugar numbers, but only to a certain extent. And even today, one of my clients who was diagnosed type 2 diabetic several years ago and has done really well with a low carbohydrate diet, he just texted me about Dr. Joel Fuhrman, I believe his name is, which is, I want to say, a vegetarian kind of doctor who recommends like 90 to 95% of calories from vegetables. And it's always confusing. People always get confused about this stuff because there's so many mixed messages. We know that if he eats primarily a carnivore diet, he tends to do really well. But again, you're always thinking like, what am I eating too much cholesterol? Am I going to have a heart attack? This headline says ketogenic diet is bad for me. Processed, if I get too much animal protein,
they're worse. Well, everything you just said, it's more pushed today than it was in 2005 when I was diagnosed. As bad as it was then, I think it's even worse today. Which is,
I think you're right.
Yeah, all the research that I've done, and I do a lot of research. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but I can tell you everything I've looked at is what I'm sure you've heard of. It's called the personal fat threshold.
Yeah.
When it comes to, Ted Naiman talks about that a lot when it comes to type 2 diabetes and what causes insulin resistance. What Dr. Naiman is talking about is correct, but what they're explaining is like the end stage, like Jeff, when he weighed almost 300, like almost at his full weight, that's what he's talking about. You have to back up. You need to go further back. How does insulin resistance start? And I think it starts from ceramides. And these ceramides, they're made from it's the saturated fatty acid ceramides, C16 and C18. C16 is palmitic acid, C18 is stearic, but the main one is C16 palmitic. That one is used as substrate. to make the precursor to these toxic ceramides if they're in excess. It's like blood sugar. Normal blood sugar for the human body is 70 to 110, maybe 120. The body does what it has to do to keep that tight window. Well, ceramides, ceramides are a fat-derived molecule. And C16 palmitic acid, saturated fat, is very important. The human body maintains that palmitic in a tight window. So if you're getting it from meat, like red meat is going to have a mixture of like, oh, I don't know, 45 to 50% monounsaturated C18 oleic, and maybe like 6% polyunsaturated. And then the rest is going to be 20% maybe of C18 steric saturated fat, 25% C16 saturated. Like a 12-ounce ribeye has about, maybe 13, 14 grams of C16 palmitic, a 12-ounce ribeye. A 12-ounce sirloin has maybe 6 grams of C16 palmitic. The reason why C16 palmitic, also known as palmitate, that's what's used as substrate when it's in excess to make saturated fatty acid ceramides in excess. It starts with palmitate. And oddly enough, like, let's say, like back in the 1930s, Dr. Walter Kepner had rice and fruit and maybe 5% protein. Well, the type 2 diabetics, he put on it like 1,200 calories a day. You can, with excess glucose, the liver, through de novo lipogenesis, converts the excess glucose to, guess what? C16 saturated fatty acid, palmitic acid. The fat cells in the liver have the machinery to convert the excess C16 saturate to C18 steric, and from there C18 oleic monounsaturated. So the body, like if you take a biopsy of your fat cell, it should contain, the body's going to want to try and keep that at about, let's say, 50 to 57% monounsaturated C18, 25 to 30% palmitic, and maybe 18% poly, N6 and N3 omega. The body, you have to maintain a certain amount of palmitic saturated because that's what's used to make the protective barrier over your lungs, C16 saturate. And it's also used for cell membranes and cholesterol esters and other functions in the body. So the body regulates that very tightly. So what happens is you go on these high carbohydrate diets, right? Like this person that you're referring to, Furman, Dr. Furman. He doesn't want you to eat any red meat. First of all, when you eat dietary fat, that's broken down in the small intestines, and it's packaged with a lipoprotein chylomicron, okay? Which is the 40. Your muscles are going to use some of that. The rest is delivered to your subcutaneous adipose tissue, and it's stored and it's metered back out for use later from there. Okay, a few remnants go back to the liver because it's never perfect. You have lipid spillover, fatty acid trapping. Anyway, a little bit goes back to the liver as remnants, very little. When you eat these very high carb diets, the liver sees by far the highest concentration of insulin. Insulin and glucagon are secreted from the pancreas and via the portal vein, first passes the liver. So the liver sees 3 to 4 times higher concentrations of insulin than the periphery, than the muscles or anything else. In fact, the liver is supposed to take out, 65% or so of the insulin on the first pass. So what happens on these high carb diets, you start this palmitate. The liver and the fat cells talk to one another. They're always in communication, the pancreas too, and the liver responds immediately. And by that I mean, like, if you wake up in the morning, you're fasted overnight, your fat cells are releasing free fatty acids into the circulation. Your muscles use some. The liver takes those free fatty acids, repackages them with a VLDL, traffics them back out. So you wake up in the morning, now you eat a meal. Well, now you're in the fed state. The dietary fat that you ate, I already explained that. The carbohydrate, your muscles are supposed to take up like 80%, 85% of that glucose load.
That's right.
Okay. So what happens with these really high carb, refined carbs, like we have today with fructose, refined carbs, quick acting stuff. Now the liver is making a lot of, the liver, if there's excess glucose from the meal, the fat cells also have, can do de novo lipogenesis. But the liver, at first pass of insulin, that high insulin shuts off fat burning. It upregulates the liver transcription factor, SREBP-1C. That upregulates the machinery to make fat from glucose, liver de novo lipogenesis. That gets upregulated. And now you're making a lot of C16 saturated fatty acid palmitate. I don't know if you can see this picture here.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, you see this here?
Yep.
That's a VLDL molecule.
Yep.
Which is packaged in each unit of triglyceride. Now that's chock full of, guess what? C16 saturated fatty acid palmitic.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of free fatty acids floating around that palmitate in the liver. And they've shown that, first of all, these ceramides, especially C16, made from that palmitate, that's how insulin resistance starts. Starts in the liver. This palmitate is embedded in your lipoproteins, that VLDL molecule. There's 2 different diameters of VLDL. There's 1 and 2. when it's in the liver, when it's triglyceride rich like that and packed full of palmitate, that's a VLDL1 molecule. And it's a lot larger than the VLDL2, which is made like you're fasting overnight. You've got free fatty acids coming to the liver. That's the VLDL2 molecule. That's just a normal size and diameter. But this triglyceride-rich VLDL is chock full of C16 palmitate. Like 99% of it is. The liver has the machinery also, like the fat cells, what I said a while ago, to take excess palmitic, elongate it to C18 steric, then go to monounsaturated. But in this situation of all these refined carbs, this high load hitting the liver, this machinery can't keep up there to convert the excess. So it's all palmitate. And that palmitate is what's used as substrate. It starts in the liver to make ceramides. They're saturated fatty acid ceramides. Palmitate is the starting substrate. Then there's, I don't want to make this too complicated, but palmitate is what's is used to make the precursor to ceramide, which are called dihydroceramides. Okay, you make the dihydroceramide in the liver. You've got 6 different ceramide syntheses, 1 through 6. And then goes all the way to C24. But in type 2 diabetes, now they've shown in atherosclerosis, fatty liver, insulin resistance, they all start with C16 and some C18. The cholesterol esters are chock full of that. The liver makes ceramide from the excess palmitate fatty acid. And those ceramides are in that VLDL molecule that morphs into an LDL. That gets into your muscle cells. C16 and C18 ceramides get deposited in your muscle cells. That's what causes insulin resistance. How? Those ceramides interfere or they impair the AKT insulin pathway. The AKT insulin pathway is what activates the GLUT4 receptors that are needed in the muscles and in your fat cells to allow the glucose into the muscle cell. That GLUT4, it's an insulin dependent mechanism for the muscle. You need that GLUT4 brought to the surface so glucose can come in. Those ceramides accumulate in muscle tissue and they antagonize that AKT insulin pathway. AKT impairs that GLUT4. So now your muscle's insulin resistant.
Yeah, wow.
You can't take up. So now more gets diverted to the liver. You sit down and have a big bowl of, or even have a sweet potato, 75, have a baked potato, medium size, 75 grams of carbohydrate. Muscle can't take it up. Most of it gets diverted to the liver. Liver, de novo lipoprotein. You're making more saturated fatty acids, C16 palmitate, more ceramide in the liver. That's how you get fatty liver. That's how your muscle becomes insulin. This is how it starts.
Wow.
That's how it's, they've shown in young women that have PCOS, they're super insulin resistant. And I've read papers where they show that they have, I don't know, it's a crazy number, like 200% higher accumulation of C16 and C18 saturated fatty acid ceramide accumulated in their muscles. And of course, they're super insulin resistant. Of course they are.
Wow.
See, but these vegan doctors say don't eat red meat. You ask them why. It's inflammatory. Why? Because of the saturated fat. Really? Do you know how many different lengths of saturated fat there are? C4, C6, all the way through C30. But the ones that are problematic for fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, CVD, atherosclerosis, it's mainly the C16, but it's not the saturated. I already explained to you, if you're eating a steak, a 12-ounce ribeye, it's the C16 palmitate saturated fatty acid that's made from your excess carbohydrates.
Yep.
That's used as substrate to make those ceramides. We need ceramides, but it's like blood glucose.
Too much.
Yeah, Dr. Gary Fetka put a video out. You must have seen it. Carbohydrates, the dose is the poison. Well, that's what's making these saturated fatty acid ceramides. And by the way, I've written posts where I talk about lipid-induced apoptosis, which means cell death. Well, Professor Unger was the first one to show this, and they've gone on to show a lot more. Beta cells and heart cells, for some reason, are susceptible to this. It's C16 ceramide lipid-induced cell death. It kills beta cells, and there's plenty of papers that show it kills heart cells.
Wow.
You hear people have type 2 diabetic cardiomyopathy. That's what I'm talking about.
Wow.
These ceramides are killing heart cells. They kill beta cells. These ceramides accumulate in your pancreatic alpha cells, and they cause severe insulin resistance in the alpha cells. If you look at a picture of the human pancreas, every glucagon-producing alpha cell is juxtaposed with a pancreatic beta cell, and for good reason, because insulin has to contain glucagon in the pancreas. Insulin, by far, is in its most potent form in the pancreas. But anyway, these ceramides induce really bad insulin resistance on the pancreatic alpha cell. So insulin can no longer properly contain. I forgot to mention one important thing too. I should have said this first, sorry. C16 specifically, saturated fatty acid ceramide in the liver. They've shown that the liver is the place that is where the excess circulating ceramide is C16. C16 interferes with the pathway in the liver called the transcriptional factor FOXO1. FOXO1 controls liver gluconeogenesis, the rate. You hear people say gluconeogenesis is demand driven. You hear that all the time. Yeah, it is. But what controls that? The transcription factor FOXO1. C16, saturated fatty acid ceramide, specifically impairs the AKT/PKB insulin pathway. That pathway messes up FOXO1. FOXO1 is not working anymore. You more or less have unregulated liver gluconeogenesis. Also, and that same pathway, the AKT insulin, that upregulates that liver transcription factor in the liver. It impairs the liver cell from taking up glucose. It increases big time liver de novo lipogenesis. That's how it starts in the liver. It's not from the saturated, because the typical human body needs about 30 grams per day of C16 palmitic saturated. If you go on a plant-based diet, you can make it from glucose in the liver if you don't want to eat meat. And you'll still make that palmitic, and you'll still make the right, like if you go on a whole food plant-based diet, you'll still make it.
Yeah.
But when you're eating, like I said, a 12-inch ribeye has about, it's either 12 or 14 grams. But they've shown that when you take it in the diet, well, first of all, in a carnivore, very low carb diet, fat's your primary fuel source. So a lot of that palmitic, you can use that in the Krebs cycle for energy. You'll burn it as fuel. So it's not going to be a problem anyway. But the body, like I said, your fat cells, if there is an excess dietary of C16, of palmitate, the liver converts that to C18 steric saturate. Then it goes to C18 mono. So it keeps that regulated. It's the excess refined carbohydrate or the super high carb diets. That's how it all starts. That's how insulin resistance starts.
Wow.
That's when you have 8-year-old sons and daughters that have fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, because of what I just explained.
Wow. Wow.
Does that make sense? Or?
It does. And I would just say, like, for the listener, like, if you're not familiar with some of these concepts, you're going to have to go back and listen to some of that again. But I would argue to the listener that that was probably one of the most clear and simple and concise explanations about what is going on. And it's such an interesting thing. You're talking about these two different systems, like the lymphatic system, which is the way we're designed to run all the time and use the fat in the diet as fuel, versus what I would call, and what Dave Champion calls in his book Body Science, the hepatic system. And it's a misunderstanding of, if I'm eating saturated fat, that's going to cause the saturated fat issues in the diet, versus just making it, which you're going to do anyway. But now you've got all these other problems, which you described perfectly, from running on a plant-based whole foods diet, that you're going to cause all these other problems. You just described modern society up and down, the predicament that everybody is in. I thought that was a great explanation.
Yeah, I was gonna make some pictures with all kinds of charts and try and explain it, but anyway, it's all here. I can explain it.
No, that's amazing. You explained it very clearly. Again, for the listener, if you didn't pick up on that, I would say it's absolutely worth it to go back, re-listen. And I would also invite people to go check you out on your Facebook page. You do an incredible amount of research, and you post it there also in a way that I feel like is very understandable. You do have a lot of charts and diagrams, and you explain all of that stuff really well. So what made you want to go to social media to be able to share that message?
Before I'm going to answer that, but I forgot an important point with all this ceramide stuff. I left a big piece out, and it's important. Excess ceramides accumulate in the mitochondria. And what happens is it impairs what's called mitochondrial fission fusion factor. And what happens is it takes nice, healthy mitochondria, it takes it, and it pulls it apart. So now your mitochondria can't function properly. you can't burn fat for fuel. I've heard you talking about when you worked in a gym as a trainer and a metabolic card. And as you're talking, my hair is going up. I mean, of course. Well, you've got these obese type 2 diabetics. And when I say obese, we all have a genetic predisposition as to how much subcutaneous fat mass we can safely make. You eat a meal, the excess energy is supposed to get stored in your subcutaneous adipose tissue. It comes out later in between meals for use. We all have like me, I wish I had a picture to show you, but Jeff, 330 pounds. Okay, now I'm 178. Well, I can get really fat. What happens is once you reach, Dr. Naiman, your personal fat threshold, when you can no longer soak up that excess energy fast enough, the excess gets diverted to visceral, ectopic fat, into abdominal. And that's how now you've got now you've got full-blown type 2 diabetes.
That's right.
And I wanted to explain what I did because that's like the end game, you know. But I forgot what I was trying to tell you. I was going to make a point here.
No, that was great.
Anyway, I was trying to explain something. I forget what it is. Anyway.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay, you wanted to know, you asked me a question before I started that.
Yeah, I did ask you about Facebook. Why was it important for you to not only do the research, but also post it in a way publicly on social media that is easily accessible? I think it's a great resource for people to go and we'll make sure definitely that we'll tag that in the show notes today. But why did you want to share that on social media?
Well, I wanted to share it as much as I could because of all the bad advice I was given when I was told I had type 2 diabetes. All the years I was told that don't eat saturated fat, don't eat red meat, don't eat eggs, don't eat cholesterol. When I started unraveling all this, you know, that's when I felt that people need to know you can put type 2 diabetes in full remission with a very, very low carb diet. Some people like to use a carnivore diet. You know, there's different, I'm not going to say one's better than the other. You have to find out what's optimal for you. You know, you have to figure some of this out for yourself. But I wanted to share my experiences and try to show people that there is a better way. You know, you can't just go and listen to the American Diabetes Association or a nutritionist from the ADA and follow those guidelines and need to be on medications. They have a ADA guideline. A well-controlled diabetic, A1C of 7%.
Wow, too high.
That's an average blood sugar of 172.
That's too high. Yeah, wow.
You know, blood sugar runs between 70 and 110. Like 85 is a normal blood sugar. You go on the street and take a normal metabolically healthy person that had a meal at noontime. I don't care if it's a mixed meal, carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Take his blood sugar, it's going to be about 85.
Yeah.
Dr. Bernstein tested thousands. Dr. Bernstein, people, you see, let me be 83. Well, Dr. B, that's how, when he started learning about all this, people in his clinic, he test them out. And adults, in between meals, 83, 85. That's how Bernstein came up with that. So, but the American Diabetes Association tells you a diabetic is well controlled at 7.
Too high.
Blood sugar of 172.
It's too high. It's way too high.
Can't imagine what the damage that's going on there.
Yeah.
Your blood vessels.
Yeah.
I mean, we could make a long podcast on just that, but anyway.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is amazing. I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm so glad that you've done so much research and you were willing to share that. Jeff, this has been an incredible conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and your story, and also learning so much about everything that you've learned and researched. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, the only place is on Facebook, on my Facebook page.
Keep it
It's the only
easy,
place- Yeah, it's the only place-
simple.
yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm telling you, you're not missing out on anything by not being on Twitter, by not being on LinkedIn and all the social media. It's so complicated and confusing. To just stick with one and stay there, I think is a good strategy. So I would continue on that path. Jeff Sear, what an amazing conversation. Like I said, thank you so very much for not only sharing your story, which again was very emotional and very authentic, but also again to do the research and to identify some of these things. And I think a better skill is even to be able to communicate it in a way that's really understandable. We're just so grateful for it, and we're grateful for you, and we're grateful for the time you took to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Okay, thank you very much. It was an honor to be on here, Casey.
It was such an honor to host you. Thanks, Jeff. And this has been another episode of Balanced Body Radio.